So, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So we last saw each other at the public workshop. So two things just wanted to discuss this evening. You know, we wanted to give you these two documents and talk about reactions from the workshop. We're working on the comp plan. We have a good chunk of it done, but we're getting into the meat of it. And so from a framework perspective, there's an introduction and a regional context where Washingtonville is in the world. There's information on what the process has been. There's the vision statement, which we all worked on at the workshop. There's the opportunities, threats, discussion, challenges, and then it breaks into a series of chapters where we're covering land use and zoning. We're gonna cover housing. We're covering transportation, utilities, just recommendations in each of those topics. Then we're gonna have a chapter on just the downtown. So there's overlap between the other chapters in downtown, but downtown, since it's such a focus for the community, we wanted to specifically have recommendations for downtown. And then the last chapter would be just general design guidelines, to have something to begin to work with, because the village doesn't have them. So, to at least express what you have, and therefore what you want new development, infill development to look like. So that's gonna be the structure of that. This is, as I was saying earlier, the baseline inventory and analysis, what we've gathered to date. It has the demographics, it has all the supporting various, maps, like where the hydric soils are, what the elevations in the village are, where the floodplains are. The historic map shows where the National Register or eligible sites are. It has information on the housing, the year built, and that was all things that we had reviewed. So we just put it all together into this document and for the public to read. The other document that you have is, this is the compilation of the results of the workshop. And it's just so you can all look at it, and this is the basis then for ultimately the recommendations that you come up with in terms of the vision. So for example, the station with the vision, what were your favorite words? Preservation, environment, character, protect, you know, they scored the highest. Opportunities, there was a whole list of, on page 4, you know, what are the opportunities, what are the assets of the village? So this all spells it out. And then in the appendices, we have pictures of all the boards, so that you can see where this all flowed from. So, my question to everybody, and this, if you find you wanna add something as far as the baseline inventory, if you think there's a map change, if you see an error, et cetera, this still can be changed. You know, we're not done with the process, but this is what's been compiled to date. This you should look at in terms of what the recommendations were. But again, we're gonna get you a comprehensive plan draft document, so you can work on that and read it. What were your sense, what were your takeaways, what stands in your mind about the workshop? In terms of recommendations or things you thought, well, we really need to address this.
And I think what we see here in terms of breakdown, in terms of order and what people see is most important. I think that's a very reference to work from, because it's coming from 30 people
Yeah.
that showed up, and that might be some reference as to the greater population positions on things. I mean, those are some of the same things we even say, kind of was just echoed. So we're not falling base
Right,
with the majority of the population.
right. So when you look at the housing preferences, et cetera, everybody loved the small lot residential, that image. And if you had housing that came in and looked like that, you know, people would be okay. That's what they're expressing, in the right place, of course. So that's a good point. So we really should be working from those recommendations as a frame of reference. We also have a summary of the mini survey that was done, that was online. So that's also forming part of the basis of the recommendations. So that was the one, and we really only asked a couple questions. It was, what is your favorite place? And that speaks to what should be preserved. So for instance, a lot of people said Brotherhood Winery. What I liked about it though is a lot of people said, I just love the entire village. And many people said, I love my home. My favorite place is my home. So they love living here and they want to stay here and they want to reside here, which, you know, I haven't actually, in asking these questions, people say that their favorite place is their home. So I thought that was kind of special, or the entire village. So those are also frames of reference. Were you surprised by any of the outcomes? Reactions? No? You kind of know those are what the issues are. One of the areas I think that when we talk about land use is, we did have the one, and it's station 8, I think station 7 or station 8, on page 12. And this one was involving the Southern Gateway, so all the, properties that are basically south of Lubna, in the village on the east side of Route 208. And we asked, what would you like to see in terms of potential future development? And all the responses are on page 13. And it really ranged, and I can't say there was any one thing that really stood out. Recreational activities, a lot of people wanted to see somehow recreation incorporated into that site. Walking trails, rail trail, bicycle trail, a pool, pickleball courts, small boating. In terms of commercial businesses, there were 8 responses: small strip mall, restaurants, bowling alley. Someone said no warehouses or major commercial. Green space parks, which is really almost related to recreational activities. Community garden, farming, park, dog park, green spaces. Community centers, community center, entertainment pavilion, space for the arts, outdoor space for community events and concerts. And then residential, 6 people responded: 2-story apartment rentals, townhomes, workforce housing, senior housing, but then someone said no apartment buildings. And then infrastructure, no big buildings, energy saving buildings. So the reality is, when we go through this whole exercise, there are gonna be properties probably along 94 and 208 that can be repurposed, some of them. And so you can expect that over time, people are going to want to redevelop. They may want to put additional housing in, they may want to put commercial in, to the extent that they have land area, I think you can anticipate that. So that's why it becomes important to have design guidelines and know really what uses you specifically want. But the biggest obvious, which everybody has talked about, is the Southern Gateway and those properties. Now, having said that, when we did the maps, a good chunk of the land is wetland, and a good chunk of the land is floodplain. But there is sufficient area toward the 208 side. In fact, I think the solar field that's there now is in the floodplain. So it is what it is. I think you need to really focus on what would be appropriate there, whether it's residential, whether it's mixed use. I know some people don't want to see warehouses, but honestly, it kind of lends itself to warehouses too.
It generates revenue for the village, which we could definitely use.
Mm-hmm. So, are there any specific thoughts on what people presented as far as the Southern Gateway and uses, or uses that you've thought about that you don't feel were captured?
What page is that on? In this one, I think page 12.
13. And the map should be in here too.
Do people understand what you're referring to?
So if
Southern
you look at
Gateway?
the very last page here, that's the property, those are the properties. And supposedly you kind of put over the area that's probably developable, but you can see the areas that are floodplain, DEC wetlands, riverine area. And again, a good area, a good chunk of that what is the, purple area, some of it is where the solar field is. So, we do have Mr. Casaza here. So if you would like him to interject, it's okay, because obviously he's a stakeholder.
I think it's such a large piece of property that we could do we can do various of the suggestions, you know what I'm saying? Pick a little here, a little there to kind of make a combination. There's so many people who want so many different things. The property's large enough to kind of do a combination. So we'd have to really come up with some good ideas on how to make it all cohesive. You know, incorporate the walking trails or something for seniors with a little strip mall for them to get their foods, or whatever.
So, let me put it this way.
Warehousing in the back, you know, on the other side where you can't really see it. You can't see the solar panels from here, from 208, right?
So, I mean, senior solar is usually a 20 to 30-year lease, so those are gonna be there for a while, I imagine. Based on my experience with looking at other solar arrays in other communities. So, in general, can you see senior housing going there?
I see it going there.
And,
Myself.
I'm sorry, you are?
Bill Palmer,
Okay.
I'm here 36 years.
Okay,
Okay, I've been canvassing for our candidates, Republican.
Bill, can I just say something?
Yeah.
Because the public comment's supposed to come at the end, unless,
Okay,
Bonnie, you wanna
that's
take
fine.
a different format, because,
it's
I-
up
It was
to
just
the
a-
board.
It was relative
Yeah.
to the senior housing.
Yeah, I think it's up to the board whether you want, you
It's just
usually
a-
do leave it to the end, but we're kind of focused on this one particular subject area, so if you feel there's a benefit to having people, the public interject.
whatever you guys
I
decide.
think, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so,
Keep it short and sweet.
for the past 2 weeks, I've been canvassing for Allison Esposito, Dory Hill for Senate. Allison
Bill,
Esposito.
this.
Bill,
Yeah.
Bill,
Yeah, hitting the top of the mountains where the big houses are. And many of them are tired of the $14,000 a year taxes, and they want out. A good majority, especially up on Clinton. So this is something to contemplate where they can fall back on and stay here in Washingtonville and let a younger couple move into their house. You see what I'm saying? And that's the feeling I got on the whole hillside. And then I worked also over in the new development too. So this is my feeling. So I think it's appropriate to make it, make it for our own people.
So senior housing, what about, the workforce housing? Actually having smaller lot housing like what you saw in the image. And so if we do any of this, I think the idea is not to have all of it housing. I think that's what came out of it. I don't think anybody wants to see one use. I don't think they wanna see one big warehouse. I don't think they wanna see one big workforce housing development, one big senior development. I think they want kind of a mixed variety, mixed use that hits
Right.
many of the goals.
Because that's what the village is right now. It's a
Right, exactly.
hodgepodge of different
I
things.
think the senior housing would lend to a lot of recreational, things that were, suggested. Bike paths and, walking paths and stuff. The senior housing would be the beginning part of that. You know what I'm saying? It could start as senior housing and then work its way into this other things that people are interested in, you know?
Yep.
And, senior housing also brings a lot of commercial, smaller merchandising because of the fact that they don't want to go too far from where they are living, you know, to purchase things and to get, merchandise. So I think senior housing is a beginning to a bigger expanse. That's my opinion.
Okay. So what about the concept of workforce housing, but workforce in the form of small houses that are subject to design guidelines? Because, if you really think about Washingtonville and then looking at the land use pattern again, you kind of have that already. These planned developments that had the open space, they're small lot, but that is workforce housing. These aren't the large houses that got built recently you know, on the outskirts of the village. That kind of internal area, the center of the village that's newer, you know, you have the townhouses, you have the multifamily, but you have those small lot residential.
Right over 94.
Yeah.
The ones that you can see right away.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are nice because they have a historic feel to them. You know, they have the way they were made and the architecture of them is kind of the front porch type look and stuff
Mhm.
like that, you know what I mean? That lends a lot to,
So that quintessential village. So they did something like that, although it was senior housing, traditions up in the town of Red Hook. Or actually, I think it's in the village and the town of Red Hook. And what's interesting is that they look like village houses with the gable roof, you know, very charming. Some of them have 2 bedrooms, some of them have 3 bedrooms, these are not big houses. They're going for around $700,000.
Well, it's Red Hook though, too.
Yeah, it is, but it's still surprising. You know why? Because there's such a demand
Yeah.
for that housing. It's the same as Warwick, where, Warwick Grove was. You know, when that started, the prices, you know, maybe the average house might have been at the time 250,000, 300, they were going for 5.
The Blackburn
Because-
Farms, what is going for? There's no amenities there.
Where's that?
Blackburn Farms in Hamptonburg.
Oh,
What is your definition of small lot?
definitely under 10,000.
10,000
Often-
what?
Oh, square feet.
Square
I was thinking.
So that's like size of acres.
Like a quarter acre, like a quarter acre.
Okay, which is similar to
A
what.
20 by 30 lot.
Well, you know, that workforce housing would be nice too, because then maybe our kids could afford to stay here.
And I'm not, I think you actually have a fair amount of multifamily. I think you have some senior multifamily of the townhouses, you know, there is a good amount of multifamily already in the village. So I think from your perspective, it might be nice to have, it doesn't have to be 4-bedroom houses, it can be the 2-bedroom houses, but it's still a single-family house. And it's on a smaller lot, and that's kind of what you saw in the picture.
We actually don't have a townhouse zone.
You know, how they used to do Cape Cods, right, after World War II, and they came back, and you think about Long Island and Levittown, those were all small lot, small housing that were for the GIs that returned. You know, and actually, and since then, people popped them up, and people have made them into, you know, larger homes because they grew and people bought them. But thinking about having something that architecturally looks like this village, not like Levittown, but that is smaller lot also, and smaller housing for families that, you know, maybe an empty nester would like it. And that's kind of like the Red Hook housing.
So we actually once had an RT zone, it's a townhouse zone. We eliminated it. That's what Moffett Ridge is right now.
Yeah.
Brookshire is not a townhouse zone.
Right,
My thought process is, you know, the smaller the lot, the more houses you can put on there, the more traffic you're gonna have. The schools could probably handle it, the number of children, since I believe the demographics were showing the decline in students. But I'm thinking, do we go larger lots? Put a smaller house on a larger lot to kind of like spread it out? And then it gives them room to build on, you know, larger homes eventually?
or maybe you do a mixed development where you have some of both. So you could have some workforce, you could have some senior, and you can have some larger lot. But how much you can get on that parcel, honestly, there's, a lot of it is taken out by wetlands, et cetera. And so if you wanna set aside some also for non-residential development, really have to figure out, you know, and that would happen through the planning process. It could be a situation where you could create a zone, like a floating zone. So let's say you start out with a zone and it just allows whatever as a base zone. But then, as a floating zone, the applicant could apply, and they would have to provide this mix of housing, they'd have to provide some retail, It's like Eastdale Village, actually like up in Dutchess County that got built. They may have to do, that maybe they do some warehousing, but not big warehouses, but warehousing for businesses on the outskirts of the village.
Have you
No.
determined what's the buildable acreage?
We can and we did, but I don't have that right offhand. So, I guess this is what I envision. I envision that closer to the Moodna, and maybe close to the Moodna, you have almost like a little extension of the downtown village that has shops. And that you have some kind of walkway
Walkability, yeah.
along the Moodna, outside of the floodplain. Actually, the walkway could be in the floodplain, because it's not gonna really damage anything. You have to have the buildings out of the floodplain. And you do these small commercial,
NBR,
Neighborhood
neighborhood
business.
business retail.
yeah. So you do the smaller conventional, then from there, you have a pod of senior, and then you have a pod of workforce, and then maybe have this area that transitions out to larger lots. And then you leave a portion of the site available for a little business park, a little warehouses, as you head out, away from the downtown. And you just transition it out, and have that mix, so it's not one big ubiquitous, like I said, just a warehouse. And so maybe again, the commercial could be 2 stories. You could allow mixed use where the residential is above, but I don't see that many places doing that. As much as everybody wants that, you often don't see it.
You see that more in downtown than you do in
Yeah.
an area like that.
Yeah.
So,
So, but you can have offices above. I really encourage people to go out to Eastdale Village. Whatever we do is definitely going to be subject to design guidelines, and we'll include photos of Eastdale, because they did such a fantastic job at creating what looks like village buildings. Have the smaller lot workforce housing look similar to what we show in the pictures. And then the senior can be similar. I think, but the senior might be, maybe you do townhouses for the seniors, you do a little multi for the seniors. That's attractive. And then again, all of that within a system of open space. So it's not that you're just putting it in. Things would be separated, Eastdale Village has a village green that people can congregate in and hang out, and they can have little concerts with a little gazebo. So you have that, you do have your biking, maybe you have connections to the rail trail or other trails. And then, again, just as you go out, you have maybe warehouses, and then have some buffer around those, so that they're separated somewhat from the other uses, so you don't get impacts from it, whether it's noise or trucks or et cetera. So I think that seems to be kind of a mix of many things that people talk about, and I don't know, it's one thought. What do you think?
I think you have an awful lot of empty retail space in the village. The mall over here, Brotherhood's got, 8 stores empty maybe. Fulton Square's got a whole bunch of empty stores. There's some empty stores downtown. Are you sure you want to dilute your retail by spreading it out even further?
We're not talking about major amounts of non-residential.
Any kind of, retail establishment would draw away a potential tenant from either the Brotherhood Plaza or downtown, where you would like, I think, to have as much activity as you could.
I think also the new residential creates demand again. And you know what, we're in a cycle right now, I don't know, there will be additional residential in the village besides your property. It just has to be done in a sympathetic, compatible way. You're not gonna stop it from happening, you don't necessarily want to. You just want it to fit within the village, density-wise, et cetera. So, yes,
Is parking part of that whole plan?
oh, you have to have parking,
Always.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's also another thing we have to think about.
Yes.
Parking.
But I think laying it out, it's gonna be a little different, because one of the issues with the village is that you're on 208 and you're on 94. And because of that reality, the on-street parking and all the little buildings, each with their own curb cut, it doesn't allow you really to have on-street parking, and people don't feel safe. And then there's segments that you can't even use for on-street parking. Whereas if you're creating a brand new development, you can design it in a way that it has its own parking, but you can have and create on-street parking where you're not concerned about the traffic as you are on major state highways.
And you've been to developments where there's housing and those residents don't mind people traveling in and out of their community to go to stores?
No, you should go, Dutchess County, go to Eastdale Village. But it's not that they're coming so much in and out of their neighborhood, people are really going to the little downtown. And that downtown is drawing from other areas because it's such a great new development. And it's designed, I mean, one of the things about some of the buildings downtown is they're older, you know? And when you have a new building, I think some tenants want new space. They don't want older space, which is something that new non-residential would offer. Modern equipment, modern HVAC, modern, you know. One of the big things is having buildings that have the high ground to ceiling. So they like that space of not having 10-foot smaller ceilings, they like having 14-foot ceilings, because it just is this different ambiance. So you get that with newer buildings, but we're not saying put in as much as you have downtown, because we don't want to entirely compete. We want people to also be in your downtown.
Part of what's hurting the downtown businesses is the lack of parking.
Mm-hmm.
So you make parking
Sure.
more available.
Right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and you know, right in
And the
front of like
walkability,
F and J, it's an hour parking. But to be honest, there's really nothing there that would require anybody to really sit there for an hour. Unless you go into F and J and you're having dinner in the Chinese restaurant, you know, nobody stays there. So, you know, I'm thinking maybe we need to change it to 15-minute parking, half-hour parking, and enforce that to move the cars around to make parking more available. I mean, I saw somebody park there, then they went up into an apartment, and they were parked there for, you know, much longer than for an hour. You've got no enforcement of it.
One of the recommendations that are in the comp plan is redesigning and working with multiple property owners to get a cohesive parking area. Because the downtown
Mhm.
parking area right now, the lot with the Bank of America, the banks, each of them have their own parking layout. And if you just coordinated it all and made it efficient, you would end up, I really believe, 20% more parking.
Just so you know, Patrice, the police department did attempt to do a parking study with the business owners downtown.
they sent a survey out.
The response was very low.
Well, and not only that, but the responses we received, if I remember correctly, is that they're not happy about limiting the parking to 15 minutes. They're afraid that's gonna hurt their business.
I would agree with that.
So,
Of course.
We asked if they wanted meters, you know, so we
Nope.
have been going through the hoops to try and investigate this.
Yeah.
And to your say about setting up different zones, I was recently in North Carolina, where they are building like crazy. And what they did is, like, my sister's in a 55-plus community. All the communities are tied by walking and bicycle paths. They created a small downtown area that has offices above it, that's got little shops, you know, little kitschy kind of shops and stuff like that. It's also faces a park. There's a riverfront park there, so you can dine outside. They have fire pits set up for people. Next to that, you have 2 separate rental units that are larger, obviously, in scale. They have more room there. But then you start to go into the next community, which is smaller lots, workforce housing. You go on to the next section of homes. Lots are a little bit bigger, not much, but just a little bit bigger, a little bit more upscale. And then you go on to towards the end, and then they start building the bigger homes. After that, just exactly that. And this is a main road. You're hitting warehouses and industrial space.
Yeah. And I think what's important is that, that actually, you have zones that intended that for a while.
That was all master planned.
But what happened was, it turns out that instead of getting a mix, because it would say we'd like a mix of townhouses, multifamily, et cetera, but it didn't mandate the mix. So that zone allowed multiple different uses, and so developers, it seems would pick one, instead of saying, okay, if you have over X amount of acres, you should be able to put in 3 different types of housing. Again, to ensure the mix. Or if you have a certain amount of residential, then you do have to put in commercial. So, I think that's the way you approach it. And it, there has to be some level of creativity to it, but I think you want to put all your aspirations in terms of what you think would be appropriate for that particular location. I mean, let's go around, so, thoughts, what do you think in terms of, and maybe not even necessarily that particular property, but a use that you think really we need to accommodate
I mean,
somewhere?
from day one, I've always said mixed use. I always pictured just kind of like what we described earlier.
So
and
a
that's-
mix of uses,
Correct.
okay.
Some neighborhood business, some residential, some senior
Mhm.
housing, with the pathways
space.
throughout, walkability to downtown, lit pathways, possibly with benches along the way, little exercise stations, that type of a thing. People can bike, walk.
Mhm.
That's what I envisioned. I submitted that when I was on that end of the fence.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I'm partial to, like a, pavilion type thing, or space for the arts, possibly, where you can have, I always reference it because I volunteer up in Bethel.
Oh,
And they
okay.
have those, there's 2 buildings there that, they have artists come, they have people come, they have farmers markets, then they have this market, that. It draws an enormous amount of people, to that area. It's just,
Are you talking about Bethel Woods?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, on the property itself, down from the museum, there's 2 buildings there. And they have events usually, at least twice a month.
Mhm.
People come there that, they make belts, or they do all kinds of different arts and whatever. And, they rent the space out, actually. They pay for a certain table and, but they draw in, actually they draw in a few thousand people at a time.
I think
So,
that's more because of the history of Bethel Woods.
Yeah, it's just, I'm just looking for a pavilion or something, or
That's a good idea.
just something to
Maybe
do.
Something to draw people together.
Yeah, just something, whether it's a little pavilion
mhm.
where a band can play or
Steve,
something one night.
Just so you know, we are doing a bandstand over by in Sewell Park.
Where?
Sewell Park, across from
We'll
the
have a
school.
bandstand.
That's already in progress. We
Okay.
have a plan, it's all designed, it's ready to go.
Yes,
Okay.
So I think that it's called the Gateway for a reason, and it's because it's one of, if not the most beautiful views in town. And I really don't see why it wouldn't be possible to have your village green in the area of the view. And that's where you could have your pavilion and your main art things going on. And it's what I've heard from people over the years, flexibility, but don't take away our view.
so keep a view corridor. That's a good point. And actually, I think any base zone should acknowledge if someone wanted to use it for agriculture, that's obviously acceptable. Or if someone wants to put a brewery or, some entertainment venue there, that's okay too. But we're thinking of things where someone doesn't want a farm, or doesn't want a horse farm, doesn't want crops, that they wanna sell it, so you need a backup plan.
I would hate to see that hill get leveled. It's like Edie just said, I mean, the view's beautiful. You see the mountain views and then that hill, it's just stunning.
I see it from my front door. What is it, 8, 9, 10 miles away from my front door?
Are you talking about, which hill are you referring to?
Woodcock Mountain.
Oh, okay. I thought you were seeing something on the Kazaza property.
No, but there is,
You
there
can see
is
from your
though.
house.
I can.
Oh, no, Woodcock.
It is
Okay.
beautiful.
Well, you can probably see over to Scunamunk too.
Hmm?
You can see towards Scunamunk
Oh,
in
yeah.
parts of the village, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also would be a big calling card for people that, you know, to fill the houses. I live by the
Mhm.
Mhm,
beautiful, village green of Washingtonville.
mhm. Any other thoughts?
What's the total amount of available acreage for kind of like building?
And that, I was
She's
just
not
saying
sure.
that.
There's
I'm
hundred and
not
fifty
sure.
acres it
Yeah, but
says for
she-
sale. We know that there's swamp
Yes.
and that's like 10 acres of it, right?
No.
More than
it's more
that.
How much is it?
Well, we were discussing it earlier, she hasn't determined yet,
If you
but
look at the very.
it's more than 10.
Yeah.
Map.
Which page?
Maybe Mr. Kazaza,
The last
Jim,
one.
do you know?
It's probably 75 to 80 acres that are not in
75?
wetland or
Okay.
not in,
Mhm.
So about,
Well, that's a lot of acreage.
about half.
well,
If I got a
the
house
corner
on
piece
a
right by
third of an
itself.
acre myself.
So about half.
I just have a question, the wetlands that you're talking about, is there any way of beautifying that? No.
You're not supposed to touch it.
Can't touch it.
Okay, just out there, I didn't know.
Yeah. So a lot of them are New York State DEC wetlands,
Yeah.
or one of them is DEC wetlands, and what's happening, I don't know if I mentioned this previously. New York State regulates wetlands that are 12.4 acres in size or larger. The way that the regulations were written is it has to be shown on a map. So they adopted maps many years ago that showed the proximate location of wetlands. So if you have a wetland on the property, your DEC comes out and validates the boundary for the wetland. If you, and there are many locations in many communities where there are wetlands that are 12.4 acres and larger that were never mapped. And what happens is they're mapped and they become eligible.
Is
And
that
when-
new, the 12 acres?
12.4, it's been like that for a very long time. So, there's more. So what used to happen is, so for instance, one of the things that typically happen is agricultural fields. Oftentimes, if you allow them to revert back to what they were, they become wetlands. And so over time, those maps that were produced, I think in the 70s, some of the agricultural lands became fallow and they were wetlands. So I had a project, for instance, in Shawndam, where lo and behold, there was a 12.4 acre wetland on it. And, well, we said, well, it's gonna be New York State DEC eligible. DEC has to go through a whole process, public hearing, et cetera, to actually map it. So they would always negotiate with developers and say, look, if you stay out of the 100-foot adjacent area, we won't stop the process to map it. We'll call it eligible. The new regulations that are coming into effect, there is no mapping. And the threshold for a wetland, for DEC wetlands, is being reduced from 12.4 to 7.4. And each of those wetlands are going to have a 100-foot adjacent area that's gonna be regulated, and it doesn't have to be mapped. If you have a developer and you say, map your wetland, and the wetland is 7.4 or larger, automatically a DEC wetland. Even more significant is, so the US Army Corps of Engineers regulates federal wetlands. And federal wetlands were looked at broadly as they were wetlands of the United States, they were associated with a navigable water body. That's why they get their jurisdiction from the fact that it's associated with a navigable waterway. What was happening is they were also regulating like kettle holes in the plains. They were regulating small vernal pools. Everything was an Army Corps wetland. And over time, the Supreme Court has whittled away what they think the Army Corps should be regulating. As a result, a lot of the wetlands that used to be regulated by the Army Corps, and which communities said and relied upon so that they wouldn't get developed or filled, are no longer regulated by the Army Corps. So New York State came in and said, okay, we're accessory dwelling units, you
Accessory,
mean?
yes.
Yeah. They're actually, I think they're allowed.
Are you
Wow.
talking Airbnbs and
Residential on there.
I'm sorry, I don't know what that
Yeah,
means,
but church.
parsonage.
A church, the
It's-
pastor's
it's a
house.
church house for-
Rectory,
Oh.
where
It's
the-
a house where the.
Person of the
clergy
clergy
lives.
at home.
So, but they have been told, you know, we're in a moratorium, so can't do anything, and by the way, it's an R100 zone, or R85 down, I think it's R100 that side of the street, so.
So in general, your zoning is very simple. There are uses that are allowed that are not defined.
Yep.
There are special uses. Now, a special use is a permitted use, provided it meets certain conditions. So normally what you do is you have conditions. So for instance, a gas station may be a special use, allowed by special use permit. And you establish specific conditions, so for instance, the front of the gas station has to have 10-foot landscaping. Has to be buffered from any residential zone 50 feet. We don't want one gas station closer to another gas station, they have to be a quarter-mile separated. Maybe we don't want them on the corners of intersections, because we don't think they're aesthetically pleasing. Whatever that regulation is, those are specifics. You have very few specifics when it comes to figuring out where you want these things. And it's one thing if it's just plain old retail and it's in the neighborhood business zone. If it's any kind of retail, it's one thing. If it's an automotive repair station with cars and vehicles and junked vehicles and parts, those you want buffer, you want screening, you might not wanna see any of those, you know. If you have a building contractor storage yard, you don't want, you want that screened also from view, all the parts, the equipment, etc. So you call it a special use because you're gonna impose special conditions. Because if you're not, then you really have to think about why you would even have it as a special use. They used to be called, before New York State really regulated them, special exception uses. So they were treated as if they were an exception to the rule and you could just deny it. That's not the way the law works anymore. So you have to have good reason to deny it. Another thing that happens in New York is, under the environmental review process, any reuse of a building, so if it was a manufacturing building and then someone wants to put 20 apartments in it, not subject to seeker. Because reuses, unless it meets certain thresholds, are exempt from seeker. So you wanna have your own standards to be able to review developments and not rely on the environmental review process. And when you have a community where there might be adaptive reuse, you have to put those in. So those are the kind of things we're gonna, we wanna put in lighting standards, dark sky standards, signs, some aesthetics for the signs, landscaping, fundamentally you need landscaping. But yeah.
Cornwall has a whole group, or at least they used to, that just examine light pollution at night.
That was fun.
Pollution at night, so you could only, if you were planning something, they would review what kind of night lighting you have, the height of it, the lumens of the bulbs, which way was it facing, it is one hell of a strict standard.
You guys were here when Ryan
So
Kitzrow
to make sure
did that
that in
presentation,
their
remember?
areas,
I don't
they
think
don't
I was
have the
here.
light pollution to affect viewing of the night sky on the
For
mountain.
light sky?
Not specifically for light sky, but he talked about 3 different things. And that was one of them, wasn't it?
I know he was here for the workshop, but I wasn't here.
No,
when he
no,
presented.
I'm talking back in, I think, November. Oh, you did miss
I
one.
might not have been
You
here.
may not have been. Do you guys remember when Ryan Kitzrow came and did a presentation,
On
him
the
and Jean
trees.
Galley?
About the trees.
With the
and
trees, there were
Yeah.
3 things, but the lighting was one of them as well.
Yeah, I wasn't here.
Night-friendly skies.
Yeah.
The village has always enforced lighting. When we did the library, we had to make sure that our engineers showed exactly where the lights were gonna be placed and where they were gonna shine and how many lumens there were gonna be. So the village has always enforced that, whether they have a dedicated crew that does that, but it's part of the review process. And we at the library went through that process when we did all of the the new
Same thing
lighting.
with the new Chase building, because they wanted to make those lights higher than they actually were. And at that time, we didn't have an ARB, I think, the planning board made them lower the height on them, so they would not shine too much because of the residential around
We
them.
just did that with Sunoco, the same thing for with their canopy.
So you've been
Versus
doing
this
that.
village
the
hall, so
looms.
dark as anything at night.
In terms of lights, one of the
Well, that's
things
because
that
motion
are
sensors aren't
happening
working
are the
correctly.
people that like to put the wall
There are
packs
motion sensor lights.
on the side of their house.
The what?
Wall packs, and they just shine out onto everybody.
Prospect Road, the new places that they're doing now, you come around the corner and you're totally blinded because they have them every angle now.
And so I think we wanna just have some standard there in terms of,
Yeah, like I live
Light
across
control.
from 21 South
I mean,
Street,
believe,
and they have a
Bonnie,
pole
that's
light.
actually in our
Goes
codes.
right
We
to my
found
living room.
another set of codes that we were discussing last night. The attorney was here,
I have the same
Dave
thing on
McCartney.
Vassar Park.
okay?
and he found that it wasn't just specific because he was here for signage,
Into my
but it
yard.
wasn't specific to signage. It referred to the lighting. So anything that was bright, flashing,
Oh, yeah,
distracting is already against code. It's just not in the 175s.
You've got that, what is it, that, flavors and fragrance building, the
Yes,
Aurora,
the factory.
Aurora, thank you.
Yeah, Aurora.
That, its back of the building lights, which are actually, you can see from 94, are very illuminated. And I couldn't imagine my house being in their backyard, it's so bright.
Yes, some of your standards, and we'll have to check, you know, they should be embedded in the zoning, but they could be embedded somewhere else. And then the zoning should have a reference then. It's always useful to reference other chapters, so people remember they have to abide by, let's say, a lighting standard that's somewhere else. But really, lighting standards should be in the zoning, for sure.
Do you have a list of what you feel are priorities for us to put together, or are you working on
So
priorities that you're aware of?
we're putting the priorities, because those are the,
See all the
those
things
are
you
the
just
goals
talked
and
about, let's say in
objectives.
the past hour.
that's all going to be in the comp plan in terms
And
of
then
recommendations.
some.
So for instance, we're gonna recommend a historic preservation board. And we're gonna recommend that the ARB take that role. It could be the planning board or it could be the ARB.
Mhm.
But now that you're saying the ZBA and the
Planning
planning board,
and ZBA
I
is a
think we'll do it
combined
with
board.
the ARB. But if they're looking at the architecture, they may as well look at the historic aspects of a building. So give you that role to also review alterations and demolitions and changes to a historic building.
Oh, Stephen. Right up
Yeah,
your
well, I'm
alley.
not the chairperson, which.
Doesn't matter.
Well, it does matter to me, so, but whatever input.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the other people on the board don't have any knowledge of any of that. They can't even read a plan,
Well, you should have little sessions to read.
you know.
I'm trying.
Yeah, you could get like is there an architect in the village that could help out?
Well, I actually had one of the attorneys come up last night so they can have a Q&A with him, because and there is no, I'm sad to say it. I have dug, I've had the attorneys look into it. I wanted training for them. There's
Mhm.
nothing. And so that's why I had requested he come up to at least maybe go through some of the signage codes with them. They can ask the targeted questions, because
So you
The-
could, so Orange County Planning Federation is always looking for courses to offer. And you should talk to Alan Sorensen, who's the planning commissioner, and say, our community really needs, we think it'd be useful if we did a session on training, reading architectural plans. What's a good architectural plan?
It's pretty in-depth. I
well,
mean,
you know why too? Part of it is that right now, they're really just doing signage. And so the process is, it goes to the building inspector first. I have him sign off on it before it goes to the ARB, because they're not professionals sitting on that board. And as far as what we were told was that's for the aesthetics piece. As far as the dimensions and the specs, that's supposed to be cleared by the building department first before it even goes to the ARB. So that's the protocol that we're using right now. But once the moratorium's lifted and we have, let's say, a historic district, this is gonna be a concern. because you're talking about facades, you're talking about materials, what can be used, what can't. You know, it's gonna be a little bit more complicated than just looking at the aesthetics of a sign and making
So-
sure it conforms.
So to create a historic district, you have to designate the historic properties and the district. So I think when you were working, or someone was working with the other consultant, they were thinking of a historic district as if it's a zoning district. A historic district is something different from a zoning district, a true historic district. You create historic preservation laws, and then you designate areas that are historic. And then you review all the alterations and the demolitions to the building itself.
So what do you,
That would be a historic district, and you have to select the properties that you want to include in the district.
I thought that's what was happening here.
Well, so we can recommend some, but normally it would flow from a historian having told us what the historic buildings are. And we haven't really had a historian.
We do
Have
now.
one now.
And
You
she's
do
doing,
now?
oh, yes, we do.
Okay, so she should
And I've been
give you-
working with her,
Okay,
No, it's Jeannie.
Jeannie
Jean Versuevo.
Versueva. She's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
We expanded, so she doesn't live in the village, but she lives in Blooming Grove. How about I have her come to the next meeting?
she should be developing a list of historic buildings and properties by section, block, and lot number or address, so we can map it.
Well, I have a question.
But that's something separate from the zoning.
Isn't that what the
Historic
Village of Monroe did? Over by State Road and that, they have all those houses they call a historic district?
So I worked on that, that's my village. First of all, there's been a National Register district there for a very long time. on
Right,
State
that's what I'm
Road.
talking about, all those,
And it's a little frustrating because certain individuals in the building department said, what do you mean there's a historic district here? And even if you show them online, the historic district, they pretend that it doesn't exist. So, what we did is, we actually created local historic regulations. So the planning board in this case is the Historic Preservation Board, they have a separate CBA. And the planning board also does the ARB in the village. They wear many hats. And at the same time that we adopted the law, we said in the law, anything that's a designated National Register site or eligible for National Register is automatically on our list. So that took care of the entire district, Stage Road. Anything else, you have to nominate and someone has to put it on the register.
Which register? The National Register?
No,
Or-
just your local historic register.
Oh, okay.
Because National Register doesn't
That doesn't say.
protect nothing, it doesn't protect
it's a
anything.
piece of
So
paper.
what, so
Yes.
Jeannie really should give a list of
Jeannie-
section,
All the properties and the why, not just that she thinks it is, but why is it historic, or why is it significant on a local
So,
level?
a question, because we talked about this early on when we started this whole thing. Historic district or historic overlay? What's the difference?
Within the context of zoning, you would use the word overlay. And that would be a special zoning district that you're calling a historic overlay. That would be a step less than having your own historic preservation board. So you could say, in this area, there are a number of historic buildings, and we have these design standards. So that would be from a zoning perspective.
the overlay, I'm sorry.
The overlay.
Yes.
But actually having a historic district reviewed by a Historic Preservation Commission, those get designated as an historic district through another mechanism. And you can still have these in the zoning.
So could you have both then? Could you have a historic overlay and then specific buildings that,
You could use the historic overlay as a way of saying, within this overlay district, these buildings are all subject to historic preservation review, subject to. It's just a tool to show you where so you don't even need that, because I'll give you for instance, in the town of Montgomery, they have a local landmarks preservation commission. And they, on the zoning map, have, and also they show on the zoning map where their local historic buildings are located. So that when we see a application come in for a property where there's this little asterisk, that has to go off to the Historic Preservation Commission, a different board that looks at it from the historic perspective. So the planning board does the site plan, but they cannot actually, they have to take into consideration what the Historic Preservation Commission recommends before they issue anything in terms of a site plan approval, et cetera.
There are also some places that will give tax abatements if you're willing to restore the property to a historic look because it was built in a certain time frame.
One of the things we added in Monroe and some other communities is incentivizing the restoration of a building where they upgrade it to back to its historic character. They get to use it for something other than what's typically allowed in that zoning district. And so typically, it might be a restaurant, it could be an office. So let's say it's in a residential zone, you know, if it's something that's still low-key and isn't gonna be impactful, you let them use it for something else because they upgraded it. But they can only have that use so long as they continue to keep the building in that, you know, upgraded, design.
Okay.
So, you know, and everybody knows, if you've been to Monroe, I forget, what is the name of that restaurant that's off of Lakes? It's in a house, in a neighborhood. It's an Italian restaurant.
Oh,
I know what you mean.
I know, it's right, I'm just off the top of my
I
head.
know, that's like me, I haven't been there in a
It's
while.
right off Lakes Road.
Yeah, yeah, and you turn in, there's a
Well,
residential
Vera
neighborhood.
Cucina.
Yes, Vera Cucina. That has an appearance to it. I think that's an older historic building, if I recall. And that's a restaurant that people go to.
Yeah, it's got a nice wrap porch on it.
Mm-hmm. So you offer incentives for people to improve their property with uses, especially when they're in a residential area. But having said that, most of your historic buildings are on 94 and 208.
Yeah.
You're a crossroads hamlet. You were created by at these two roads that
Yeah,
intersected.
but if you look on Lark and Phillip Street, there's a
Yeah.
lot of older there, because that was really more towards our downtown, which is now.
Right, closer in.
Yeah.
North Street.
North Street,
Yeah,
so
North Street.
that's why we put that map together in the inventory, the very last map shows the year that it was built. That's why you'll see all of them really clustered around
Right.
the crossroads, but yes, there are some that are scattered.
Well, North was originally North Main Street.
Right.
My house, South Street was South Main Street. And we're actually, where I am, I'm across from him, your house is, late 1800s as well over there.
Probably.
Yeah, we are 4 houses on 5 acres. Mine, the deed I have goes back to 1898, but the house, we found stuff in it, 1879,
Wow,
1854.
that's special.
The house next door is 1876, the one this way is 1800s. Behind me, the original house that burned down was actually, they think it might have been a barn that had been converted to housing.
Well, that's another thing in terms of character. You just see these, and you don't see in a lot of places, you see these houses that still have the barns. And you really wanna try and protect them. You know, and you don't think of barns, and so it wouldn't necessarily be National Register eligible, and yet you could designate it locally as.
New
a
York
little
State
artist-
has the Historic Barns Preservation Act, which gives you grant money to restore barns built before, I believe, 1920.
Right, they do.
36 North Street
But you
has
wanna,
one.
but you can protect them by designating
Yeah.
a road.
Carriage
Moffett
barn.
Carriage
Library,
barn.
when they were rebuilding that barn, they went through a lot to make sure that that was saved. Chuck
Mhm.
Quick has a barn on his property, which is right on Main Street there.
Mhm.
The
No, it's quite a few.
library preserved the carriage house that was behind one of the houses that were taken down when we expanded the library.
Mhm.
But rather than knock down the carriage house, which was in terrible shape, we actually had it picked up and moved, and it's been restored.
Mm.
So, and you can see it when you go by the site, but many of the properties had carriage houses where they kept their horses
Yeah.
and their carriages, so they could
Because
go.
that's evidence of an older community, right? Of
36
restoration.
36 North Street, I was just in there a week ago. I felt like I was walking through a time warp.
36 North?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's where the original plan was to demo the home. It's the one
Across-
that looks like the castle, the
Mhm.
castle top. You know, the white one. It's under complete reno right now.
So
It's still standing.
the only thing that's gonna save them is to designate these buildings as local landmarks. So again, if you wanna do it, we need the complete
I'm
list.
working with Jeannie.
The VFW, that's the old Methodist church.
Even the police station.
Yeah, the first firehouse.
But
So
the
some of
home,
these
but
are
the homeowner
documented.
has to be on board with it, correct?
Hmm?
The homeowner would
No,
have to be.
No,
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 that's
if you
why you
create
do a
that
local.
historic, they
No,
have
no,
no
no,
choice.
No, but we haven't yet, and right now we're in that
Yes.
place.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, so that's the thing about the National Register. If someone is nominated to the National Register and the homeowner does not agree, then it's not listed. Thank you. So it becomes National Register eligible, but it's not National Register because, again,
And that
the
only
homeowner didn't want
protects
the
the
designation.
exterior, it does not protect an interior.
But the other thing is that the state doesn't recognize and doesn't require the consent of the owner. So many of the properties that are National Register eligible are on the state register.
So, oh wait, let me just clarify. Okay, national, they would need to be on board, but you're saying this, if
Not
it's
the
just,
state.
The
Really?
homeowner for the national.
The homeowner.
The
A,
homeowner for the
property-
national
the
would have to
property
be-
owner- The
correct.
property owner
the
has,
property owner.
for it to be a National Register site, they have to consent. If they don't, it remains National Register eligible.
Okay, but if we just,
State register,
right,
if, it does not require any consent.
so, but if we wanted a marker on the property, do we need consent?
Oh, yeah, because you're putting a structure on someone's property, it's still
Okay.
private property.
That's why they
But all
usually
of
have on the
this-
street.
But all of this doesn't matter, because unless you protect it locally, being now on the national or state register means nothing.
Mhm.
They could demolish it tomorrow. You have to put in regulations where you first said it's historic locally, and before you demolish, you have to go to this group and prove to us why you have to demolish it.
So I think what Jennifer was referring to earlier, because when we were on this side of the fence, we were talking about expanding what was at one point our historical district, which we really didn't technically
Which is
have.
like your downtown, you're thinking of.
Right.
Mhm.
And so we started mapping out where we wanted to extend it, all the way, all across 94, 208 North Street, etc. What leverage does the committee have here? Do we have to do that?
Well, to be historic, you have to document they're historic.
What you're asking from Jeannie,
Yeah, I'll talk to Brian to see if
okay?
he suggests a particular way to implement this.
Maybe I can connect you, Jeannie, and Brian,
Mhm.
Jean, together, so you can have that dialogue, and so
Yeah.
she's clear in what needs to be done. I mean, I will have this conversation with her tomorrow.
But literally,
But-
like building by building,
Right.
she should be able to say, this is 1800s constructed, the exterior still is reminiscent of how it looked in the 1800s, you know, maybe altered a bit. And each one, or if it is a famous not famous, but a known doctor in the village lived there.
She has a lot of that already.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she does.
she does.
So
There's a lot
all
of
that,
lot of that.
Okay.
but the problem is it's not in it needs to be on a lot by lot basis, section block and
Section
lot,
block and lot.
you know, a description, a number, Facebook, it's great she puts it on Facebook, that doesn't help.
No, I'm
You know,
just saying,
you know
our
what I'm saying?
knowledge is.
Yeah, so we need to collect all that.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Get
it's
into
been
a document.
bastardized. Example, what is that? 24, 20, 18 to 20 South Street. Ralph's.
Oh.
Yeah.
That was a two-family, before that, that was the Erie Hotel. And that was a hotel that, on the railroad line there, during the winter, the railroad workers would stay there overnight. When they were moving out from, Newburgh, from the Hudson River, down to Oxford Depot for the winter months. But that house has been so bastardized now, you would never know what it was unless you knew the history of it.
But in that way, if someone does something with those buildings nowadays, you could still require some design guidelines. Let's say someone wanted to do something with it, they could still improve its appearance if it comes in for something.
That one's got issues anyway, because they put a whole addition on it without a permit, so great. They made it 2-family, 3-family, like nothing filed for it.
Wow.
Also, Jeannie's website, she has, I don't know how many hundred people contributing to it now with pictures of historical things and data.
1,000, she's at 1,000 now.
Wow.
In a very short time.
Wow.
She has a lot of things already documented, this is how this house looked, this is what it is now.
Okay,
Yeah.
hopefully she has these all by, like I said, address or section block them out or something.
Sure.
that's organized.
But
Good.
that's easy enough to trace it.
Absolutely.
Because in the end,
Have
we,
they- well, can you finish?
yeah, no, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna ask about that Heritage Trail that they wanna continue all the way through. Have we taken that into consideration as to, you know, where it's gonna be?
Well, it's gonna be along the railroad right away. But what you do wanna think
It's like,
about,
yeah, cause it's
It's
gotta
how you
cross
connect.
208.
yes.
There's, yeah, I mean,
Well,
they have like yield signs
It's got
and,
multiple crossings,
Yeah.
actually, over the Moodna, because that railroad went like this, you know, the
It's
stream
got
goes like
7
this.
crossings.
Yeah, exactly.
How many-
In fact,
Seven.
one of the crossings
Oh.
is over by
My house,
Ossatec, off of
Yeah.
right?
There's a bridge back there.
there's
Right,
2 of
There are
them.
5 railroad bridges across the stream between Patricia Lane and Salisbury Mills. There's
Yep.
5 different crossings of the
Right.
stream, and there's 3 or 4 crossings of different highways. Route
Yeah.
94, Route 208, Locust Street.
The bridge I'm thinking of is just a bridge. It wasn't necessarily with the railroad, actually, the one that goes to the farm.
Oh, that's my bridge.
Yeah, that's your bridge.
There's a second bridge, but
Yeah.
that's a highway type bridge.
I know the other one that he's talking about,
There's a railroad bridge,
Right.
and next
Yeah,
to it is a.
because there's one on the property behind me that goes from the high school over towards South Street.
Right.
That's when the senior skip day, they were all on it.
Now, it's interesting, there's the Mays Field Dam, right? Is that historic?
They took that dam out.
Is already gone?
Yeah,
They
did
weren't
the
going
town-
to.
Did the town take that dam out?
FEMA.
Oh, FEMA did?
Somebody did,
Mitigations.
Oh, my goodness.
a year or 2 ago.
I just did the inventory and there was nothing in the record that said it was taken out.
Let the fish in the water run free.
Okay, oh well, it's done.
They need to take that
It's
other
still in
one,
the
raise
aerials.
the levee down.
I guess that'll be an
South Grand Hills, they need to
update.
lower that back again.
All right, so anything else you wanna cover?
Two
Yeah, we're
things.
just working on the comp plan.
I just sent you and Sam, Jeannie's contact for my
Perfect,
contacts, so you've got her number.
okay.
And then I was looking over a village agenda about Cardinal Drive Community Garden,
Cardinal?
Cardinal Drive?
Oh, yeah. They wanna do, like a CSEA or a community garden.
Who's they?
In the floodplain where the old, tennis courts were.
Who's they?
Somebody approached Tom about doing it.
I don't
So
know.
we're recommending that in the comp plan, in general, to consider community gardening somewhere.
So, it was a
For
group
instance,
of
down Bar-
approaches.
Actually by Cardinal,
Yeah, well, there
Oh, that's
used to
so
be
funny.
tennis courts there.
yeah.
Mhm.
That was someone's, house had the tennis court.
Yeah, well, there were 5 houses, I think FEMA took over there.
I worked on that,
At least
remember?
one of them was Tom's house.
One of them was
Yeah.
Tom's.
It was Tom's.
So I was the
Your
one,
mayor
Once
lived
was
there.
enough.
I did all the acquisitions and all the paperwork.
So I think it was 5 that
Well,
went,
in total, there were 18 in the village.
18,
But down
but
there,
the 5 over there.
Yeah,
So, but they talked about in the old, where the old tennis court was over there, about putting in something, because the other lots, some, trees have been planted, water mitigation trees, to dry up some of that, so
I
they don't
think-
wanna interfere with that.
Yeah, so those are all, they're deed restricted, or they're supposed to be deed restricted, because you can't put structures back on there. But you certainly can put sort of low maintenance you know, having a community garden wouldn't be a big deal within the floodplain or on these properties. That's something of that nature, so.
And that's what the talk was, just doing, you know,
I think
simple
it's a great
garden
idea,
for people.
or somewhere in the floodplain, you know, even Sewell Park,
That's where, but we did discuss it there as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, that, it doesn't mean you can't have more than one, but it's kind of nice, but especially, I think, in the more
There,
dense
did you
areas.
see the plans for the gardens at Sewell Park?
No,
It's a pollinator garden.
Wow,
is it, no one sent us.
they're
this.
stunning.
Pollinator garden, like,
No, when you have these
Bees and
proposals, it's
flowers.
good to send them to us so that we know for the plan, you know,
Okay,
we can integrate them. All right, so, I mean, we're gonna work on the plan, you're gonna get the plan. If you think of anything, you can always email us, but having the plan, there'll be a target in terms of being able to read it and then make amendments to it.
You said at the beginning of the meeting that some of these documents are online.
Yes,
Are they on the village site or on your firm site?
they're on the village.
Village site?
Yeah, there's a link just for the comp committee, and
Okay,
on that link, you'll see several, all the maps are there,
okay.
the workshop results, a summary and et cetera.
mhm.
And something just went up today,
So the inventory and also the workshop summary, both of them are there.
right? Do you want me to see if I can arrange for Jeannie to be here at the next, Jean to come at the next,
If you want to have that conversation, but I think this group is gonna be reviewing the comp plan document. And in fact, you might wanna have offline where we're not present, just to dig into it too.
We're probably, Donna, you and I can arrange with Jeannie and whoever else wants to come and have a discussion.
okay,
I think it'd be a great discussion.
Because Carol and I can look up, section blocks and lot.
Easy.
okay.
And we can also, well, we can't pull deeds because I'm too cheap to pay Callie. But we can look up, you know,
Yeah.
year built and stuff like that. I'll go back if I have to. If you guys get a list of properties you want, I'll go dig up deeds to, and I can go back pretty much to 1800s on.
But some of it's just creating a catalog.
Yeah,
It's really, so an inventory form, if you look at like a National Register inventory form, it has a photo, it has section, block, and lot, date, you know, and then it has any description of why it's considered historic or architectural.
yeah, I've been on that one.
Yeah, so, you know,
Not very easily searchable.
no, that's kind of what you want in terms of a catalog.
An inventory form.
Right, and so then once you have the inventory forms, the more you have at the time of adoption, the more you can adopt right there. Because after that, if you don't adopt it with the local law, you go through, a process of, listing them locally. And you have to, you know, do that in a public session, you know, it's just more cumbersome than if you do it right along with the local law.
I have a question. So if she comes up with a handful, which she will,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say we're talking about creating this historic district, what about if there are homes in that would fall in that parameter,
Mhm.
but they don't qualify?
So from a National Register perspective, they're called non-contributing structures. So they're not, you wouldn't necessarily regulate them.
Okay,
So even though
So
you
they
create
can
the district,
okay,
maybe the building inspector could determine that that's not historic, therefore it doesn't need to be regulated.
okay.
But there really should be a database of all the properties that are in that district.
But it wouldn't hinder us from naming that
No.
as a district because there are some
No.
homes that may
The,
not
the
fall into.
the Stage Road District has, if you read the whole district description, it'll say there are 18 properties that are historic and 3 that are non-contributing.
Okay, very
It'll
good.
say that.
So I think you need to just define in your writing at what year do you consider historic. You know, in 1950s,
Anything prior
mid-century
to-
modern, which we have, I think, one in the village, you know, there's a movement to preserve mid-history modern. You have 2 houses that are Sears houses from the 1930s in the village.
Right?
You know, do you wanna consider the 1930s? Do you wanna consider Sears hit houses?
Well, this is where a historic preservation committee would make that determination.
And I think this is a really important piece of this comprehensive.
I think this is your big, one of your big nuts to crack.
It's very easy for us to put in the zoning because we already have models.
I mean, you could
It's
go
just
back
we
to
need
the
to sign
19,
it, and like I said, I'm recommending you go to the ARB if you're gonna create a planning zoning.
Sorry, good night.
you can go back to the 1920 census and see how many residents were there in Washingtonville. So it was built prior to 1920. You want that to be your district, any house that was standing.
Your district will probably go back to 1800s.
Yeah, but I mean, the things built before,
Yeah, yeah.
prior to 1920, you know.
Well, 1940, 1950 can be historic.
Well, that's what I'm saying, they have to do,
It's at least
define
50,
what that
but
cutoff is gonna be.
I
guess
think
we're
you kind of
historic,
know, you know,
Wow.
but usually it's 50 years.
I feel older.
Yeah,
I know,
I'm
I know.
Anything else?
You know, and there is parking, which goes very unutilized unless the library has something going on, but the library is like a U where there's parking. But between them and the other little strip mall,
You want
the
to,
That
AutoZone
all
park,
belongs, but that all belongs to that strip mall.
That belongs to AutoZone.
Yeah, it
Mr.
belongs to that,
Bollenbach owns that.
that business.
but who's stopping you from parking there?
Park there and see what happens. They enforce it, yes.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know,
But
it's
if
their
you wanted
property.
to,
Yeah.
but if
Because
there's,
a lot, you know, at nighttime, I went to the library for an event and there's no more parking at the library, so I parked over there.
I have done
They've
the
been
same
nice to
thing.
the library, and they sometimes, when we have a big event, if people don't wanna park across the street in the village lot, some people will park there, and so far, we've been able to do that on a friendly basis, but it's not the library's property, it belongs to Mr. Bollenbach, who leases the AutoZone store and the other store there.
whatever's there this week.
It seems like the people that own the buildings, that rent them out to our businesses, are not very cooperative or very nice.
Well, but
Because I think that's also part of the
Mr.
problem.
Bollenbach has been phenomenal with the library. When we were building the new library and we needed to adjust the property lines and the rights of ways that were there, he was more than helpful. So there might be some other property owners
Some
who
are,
aren't cooperative, but
some are better than others. Example is we're trying to put, the cute lighting downtown in the square, like you see in Goshen across the street and Warwick, you know, the old fashioned bulbs. One of the property owners already said, sure, no problem, you can attach it to what my building. The other one, we're still waiting on an answer.
you know, there's a couple of ways to look at things too. You know, if the businesses there are open, the parking is meant for those businesses, you know? You can't really blame a business owner for not wanting people to take up their parking spaces. If the businesses are closed, like if the library is having something in the evening or something, then it's not bothering anybody.
so when you go to Nyack,
Right.
they park in the bank spots, they
Oh,
park,
they
people
park
park all over the
It's a
place.
nightmare.
Listen,
If
my
it's closed.
building, people park in my building, okay?
In yours?
Yes.
Even
Right,
I
do you
don't
know
have
where
that
my
much
building
guts.
My building is Hudson Heritage Realty, it's right at the traffic light,
Okay.
okay? People park in my parking lot. It's private property, sorry. You park there, you know, unless you call me and say, may I park there? I'm calling the police and having you towed. So call me uncooperative.
The only thing I'll say about empty spaces is, I don't know why sometimes they're empty spaces, because you'll go to some communities and they have pop-ups where someone will just sell something. You know, there's always someone looking to start a business, someone trying to be entrepreneurial, and if you don't have a tenant, why not at least allow someone who's interested in selling
Pop-up
something?
restaurants are huge.
Right. And then the other thing I'll say is in Monroe, they have a building that they have all these, and this is actually was done down in Pennsylvania. We went on this field trip for a planning conference. But they have this one building and they've converted it and it's got booths. And
Oh, I
that's
know
what
which
they have
one
in the
that
garage.
is, right down on Lake Street there.
Exactly. And so they have the booths, and each of these little booths is someone selling crafts, selling something. You know, and it's something that could be done in a retail space.
It
That's
is
just
done,
empty.
we have one right in Washingtonville right now, Mama's. That's exactly what they do, they have all different artisans who
Little booths, yeah.
have their, it's not even little booths, but it's the same
Right.
concept.
But to have a business where the space is just sitting vacant, it kind of is bizarre to me, because they're not making rent off of it, and they're
Right.
paying, right?
Are you gonna end your meeting so you can
Yes,
turn off the recording?
yes, it's 8:15. We're good.
You know, a few meetings ago, we talked, and that's something that's in our thought process.
For accessory dwelling units, you
Accessory,
mean?
yes.
Yeah. They're actually, I think, they're allowed.
Are you talking
Well-
about Airbnbs and stuff?
That's something that's in our thought process.
For accessory dwelling units, you
Accessory,
mean?
yes.
Yeah. They're actually, I think, they're allowed.
Are you talking
Well-
about Airbnbs